You wanted the best. You've got the best podcast. The hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Hi, folks. Chris Voss here from the ChrisVossShow.com. Hey, coming here with another podcast. We certainly appreciate you guys tuning in. Be sure to go to YouTube.com/Chris Voss to see the video version of this. And also refer the show to your friends, neighbors, and relatives. You can find me on LinkedIn under Chris Voss, Facebook under Chris Voss. You can find me everywhere. And if you get a chance, go to iTunes under the recommend section of the Chris Voss Show and give us 5 stars and give us a recommend, if you will. Tell us why you like the show. Hey, Chris Voss makes me laugh, etc., etc. That helps us get more users on the show and keeps the show rolling right along. Today we're going to have a very super topical discussion with a brilliant philosopher, and eternal light bulbs for me. We had a lot of aha moments, and I think you'll enjoy it too. Stick with it. It's very cerebral, but I think it's something you'll see why our world is having the challenge it is and maybe how we can repair it. He will be Justin E.H. Smith. He's a professor of history and philosophy of science at the University of Paris. He is the author of Divine Machines and another book, Human Nature and Human Difference. Another book, The Philosopher, A History in 6 Types. And, of course, his latest book, Irrationality, from Princeton University Press. He's also the editor-at-large of Cabinet Magazine and the main asteroid belt, 13585. Justin Smith was named after him in 2015. He has his own asteroid belt. So there you go. That's that for cool. So anyway, let's bring him in the show and get it on. Hey, okay. Justin, welcome to the show. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, thanks so much for having me. Doing very well.
Awesome sauce. You know, I had seen your book with the Princeton University Press. They had sent me a catalog of stuff, and I was like, A History of the Dark Side of Reason, Irrationality, and they started reading some of the details on it. I'm like, holy God, this is the topic for the ages that we're in right now.
Yeah, very timely indeed.
So give us an overview about what your book is about and the context of it.
Well, it's a strange balance because by kind of training and my background, I'm a historian of philosophy, right? And my specialty is in the 17th century in rationalist metaphysics, people like Descartes and Spinoza and Leibniz. But I also write and think about the contemporary world and social media and recent developments in electoral politics and so on and so on. So the book is a strange hybrid between this scholarly, dusty, antiquarian world that I inhabited for many years and the contemporary world that we encounter on Twitter every single day. And essentially, I wanted to bring some insights from the long history of philosophy to bear on our effort to understand how it is that arguments that unfold in social media, for example, seem so hopelessly doomed from the outset. And to take another example, I wanted to bring the history of philosophy to bear on our effort to understand the recent rise of of populism in politics, and what I take to be the serious crisis of liberal democracy throughout the world. So that's in a nutshell what the book is about.
And so you bring a lot of that back from the 5th century BC murder of Hippasus. Am I pronouncing that right?
Correctly? Yes. I say Hippasus, but
Hippasus. Okay.
This
I'm not learned. I went to public
tomato
school,
thing.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's a wonderful parable to begin with because, well, first of all, it probably never happened. It's probably something that was kind of added as an ornament in late antique doxography about the Pythagorean cult. But the Pythagoreans are wonderful because in some sense they're the kind of founders of what would come to be the ideal of reason in the Western world. It's thanks to the Pythagorean tradition that we have certain of the cornerstones of what we understand to be rationality. But at the same time, the Pythagoreans were a bunch of wacko cultists who all had to, abandon their families, wear the same uniform, live together in dorms, eat the same food, and respect all sorts of bizarre rules that their dear leader insisted on, like not eating beans and, all sorts of curious
Did they
things.
have to wear red hats?
They didn't wear red hats. I mean, over time, like in later Pythagoreanism, I think it was a purple and gold robe. But so it's an interesting, already right there, we have the paradox, right? Where wherever you have people insisting on the primacy of reason, if you start to probe into it, even for a moment, you start to discover that there's also what, in the title of the book, I call the dark side, right? Wherever you have people insisting on the primacy of reason, and especially when they're insisting on how rational they themselves are, you find some pretty irrational behavior. So what happens to Hippasus of Metapontum? Well, he's a member of the cult of Pythagoras, and he is one of the few who's privy to this new remarkable discovery of irrational numbers, of the square root of 2 or the diagonal, that is a non-terminating decimal series, right? Which freaked them out, right? Why did it freak them out? Well, because it meant that, if the natural world is built on mathematical principles, and one of the principles is something that can't possibly be cognized, right, because it's a non-terminating decimal series, then this effectively shows that the world itself is irrational, right? So Hippasus makes the mistake of divulging this dirty secret to a non-cult member. So his fellow Pythagoreans take him out in a boat, tell him they're going fishing, and when they're out there, they drown him, right? So there's this explosion of bloody violence that is the result of this movement's interest in kind of transforming rationality into dogma. And the argument of the book is that this keeps happening over and over and over again throughout history. And you can see the reign of terror after the French Revolution, for example. At the same moment, the revolutionaries are establishing or are transforming Catholic churches into what they literally called temples of reason. They are also chopping off people's heads in an insane kind of frenzy that nobody can control, right? So Hippasus of Metapontum is just kind of the founding parable of this thing we see over and over again in the history of rationality.
That scene of taking him out of the boat, Mario Puzo must have copied that in Godfather 2 when Fredo goes out. And does the whole thing.
Yeah, it just,
it's interesting to me what you're talking about, because I actually grew up in a cult, and I've always, what changed me in coming out of it, and I always knew it was BS, but you had to exercise yourself from it, was all my life, whether it's been religion or anything else, is what makes people believe things and start to believe things that sometimes are either, like you say in your book, completely irrational or semi-irrational, whether it's cognitive bias, et cetera, et cetera. But then it becomes such a complex belief system that supports that one crazy idea. And and sometimes it gets out of hand, sometimes it gets people killed, sometimes it kills other people. And we may be seeing some different things of that. But it's interesting to me, was this cult that you're talking about, was there a guy that was the head of this, or were they all just praying to a god? Was it like a Jonestown sort of guy?
Well, it's Pythagoras was their head, and I mean, I don't want to exaggerate this. I don't want to say he was as bad as Jim Jones, but what I do want to say is that it's telling irony that the very earliest beginnings of the history of Western philosophy are mired already in cult-like behavior, right? In what we think of as irrationality, right?
Was part of their challenge and our challenge and their issue with Hippasus because everyone is trying to cling to the fact that maybe life isn't as horrible or is untamed or that it is random, that we're all just we're always trying to do these forms and functions. In fact, people get up the same time every day and go to bed the same time every day because they're trying to reason this crazy life that many times doesn't have that.
Sure. And you can see that. You can see religious ritual, for example, as an attempt to impose order on an inherently disorderly world, and inevitably the disorder starts to creep in no matter how much you perfect your rituals, indeed, right? And I suppose in a sense you can see the history of Western philosophy as attempting to replace ritual with argument and proof, right? We try to come up with proofs that satisfy us in the view that the world is inherently rationally ordered, rather than imposing the rational order ourselves through ritual, right? And that's a huge transformation, and it might, in the long run, turn out to be less successful than living life through ritual, right? But what I mean is, what were the ritual practices associated with, say, Cartesian epistemology or something like that? There weren't any, right? Descartes just sits there and writes books, right? Or sits there and thinks. And the loss of that ritual dimension of life, the belief that somehow, doing the sign of the cross or lighting candles or doing yoga or whatever, that all of those things are somehow less rational than the kind of pure use of the faculty of reason, is perhaps a mistake. But I might be getting off on a tangent here.
Well, I think we've seen a lot of different examples of this over time. Like, the Earth is flat. Remember, there are people killed over that. People and then there was Socrates who had to drink to his own death because he wouldn't subscribe to a certain thing.
Sure.
It's kind of interesting. You made me realize something that just occurred to me. I'm an atheist, and I'm very comfortable with the fact that I don't know what goes on outside this life, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time fretting over it, worrying about it, wasting whatever precious time I have. But I do have a ritual. But I do have a ritual of morals of some type, where I have do good unto others. I have a basis of being a good human being. There's a lot of people that say, well, if you don't have religion, then you just go kill people and you're a rampant criminal because you have no morals. When in fact, we actually do. I mean, it's just the basic things that make sense, like do good unto others so they don't go to you. I don't go pillaging, raping, and killing and murdering. I mean, maybe on Wednesdays, but
Wait, so do you think that? But is this?
But still, that's a ritual, right? That's a ritual.
Well, of sorts, yeah. But is this just strategic on your part? I mean, you just.
Well, I'm good to other people because I want them to be good to me, and I realize that if we all just go full chaos and apocalyptic stuff, and we all start living the purge, that it might not work out good for me because I'm probably, the the first
You're a
one they're gonna.
Hobbesian.
Yeah, I'm the first one they're gonna cannibalize. Big fat guy.
Follow Thomas Hobbes on this
Yeah,
point.
if I'm on the Donner Pass thing, man, I'm the first one that gets eaten. I'm not really that good with guns, and I'm kind of slow with being old. So, I'm the first one who doesn't make it in the purge, and I'm an asshole. So everyone's gonna try and kill me. So I kind of follow the golden rule. I just do it because it's right, and I try and be good. But I just realized that is in a ritual in and of itself in form.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm making fun of religious people for their little rituals of the cross or Hail Mary full of grace, or I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But there is a programming to it.
Sure.
That's the one thing I disagree with is the programming. Like you say with the cult that he was in. Yeah, all that stuff is a programming. It's ritualistic, but it's also a programming from the people running the show.
So you came up with your rituals on your own.
I think so. I'm just getting that from you because I'm like, I actually do have, I do have some cultist sort of ritual to my atheism of whatever, but I don't know if I don't think there's any way around it, but.
No. There's no way around it. But I mean, there's all sorts of arbitrary rules that, if you're like most people, you probably eat cows, but not chimpanzees. You probably, do all sorts of things.
We stay away from the cute animals, but we'll eat everything else.
Yeah. Things that have absolutely no grounding in rational arguments, even though philosophers try to come up with rational arguments for them in a kind of ad hoc way, right? Like why we do some things rather than others. Yeah, go ahead.
One of my favorite things to say is the one thing man can learn from his history is that man never learns from his history. I think that's just one of mine, which is a kind of an update of those who don't learn from their history are doomed to repeat it. The problem is man never learns from his history, which is why you're taking this Greek story and you're finding it on Twitter today, I guess.
Yeah, I forget where I saw this, but those who don't learn history are condemned to repeat it, but those who do learn history are condemned to sit back and watch others who haven't learned history repeat history, right? So you can't win. Like I tried to write a book that brought the full force of historical knowledge to bear on contemporary problems in the hope that it would help to resolve them. Has this book made a tiny, tiny drop of difference in the world? I think that would be self-deception on my part if I said it has.
Well, probably. I don't know, man. It's such a weird thing how we always repeat history. I just had Jill Wine-Banks with her Watergate story. And she was on the original prosecutor's thing. And one of the things we talked about is I'm like, was it so weird that like 40 years later, she was actually a commenter for MSNBC. She's a legal analyst for them. And you're reliving this whole history 40 years ago under the same sort of principles, the same sort of everything that she actually with her team laid a foundation for. And I'm like, do you pinch yourself? Is it weird that you're like, wow, this is some deja vu crap going on?
Yeah.
And
I should say, like, I often despair about how little good knowledge of history does in the world, but things might be changing, right? I went to get a COVID test recently, and the medical technician asked me what I do for a living, and I never tell people I'm a philosopher because they think
you have to wear the sandals and the
it's just
toga.
too much to process. So I usually say I'm a historian. I tell them a half truth, and so this medical technician said, "What do you do for a living?" And I said, "I'm a historian." And he said, "This is what really surprised me." He said, "Wow, that's an important job to have right now." Right. And I thought, what is he talking about? Why right now? Because, I don't live in the United States, and there's a lot of things that I don't understand. But what he meant was it's important to process historical information in order to take part in contemporary debates about, say, the demands of Black Lives Matter for reparations and what we should do with all the Confederate monuments throughout the United States, and so on. And I thought this was really interesting because most of my life, if I have told people, again, telling them a half-truth, half-lie, that I'm a historian, the reaction has been, well, quit living in the past, dude. Get with the program and start earning some money, and finally it's changing. And so maybe that's good. I don't know. Maybe.
I think it is. We opened up the show a couple months ago to just all authors and all books. It used to be just CEOs and business people. And so I open up to everybody, and it's been really wonderful. But what's interesting is a lot of the books and a lot of discussions we've been having in the history of what people wrote in these books, like yours, is like you say, it's been like, the Black Lives Matter and dealing with Donald Trump and everything that's going on right now. A lot of it's been very Black Lives Matter, and it almost became this serendipitous discussion about race through all the books that were up, and history. And someone asked me, they go, "Are you just doing a whole bit for are you just having all these guests on Black Lives Matter?" I'm like, "No, man, we just pick random stuff out of a catalog, and the serendipities has been coming through, and the history of what all these great authors like yourself have written about have just, just all this stuff applies to what's going on right now because, man, from this history." But, I'm a philosopher too. I have a TikTok account.
Of course. Yeah.
At least the Trump shuts it off. But, every flipping millennial and Gen Zer. So what led you to write this book about irrationality?
Oh, let's see. It's hard to give an account of how it came into being. I think there are some things I would do differently now. In fact, I had written in 2015, I actually published a book on the history of the concept of race, which was very focused. And right now I'm writing a book called The Living Mirror, Philosophy of the Internet, which is also very focused. And irrationality was my everything into the kitchen sink sort of attempt at a magnum opus, just the thing that does it all, says everything I've ever thought. And I would caution others against doing that. But I really wanted to kind of give a comprehensive statement of the way I understand both the history of philosophy, but also this curious kind of teetering in my own sensibilities, in my own way of understanding the world, between kind of really no-nonsense, kind of Neil deGrasse Tyson style, like let's cut the crap and do some measurements kind of attitude about other people's claims. So that, on the one hand, but also on the other hand, something that is very much the opposite of that in me, which is a love of elusive, imagistic poetry, a kind of fascination with fringe beliefs, an appreciation for weirdo occultists like the Theosophists and Madame Blavatsky and stuff like that. Like, I love all of that, right? I just love it. And so, for years, I've kind of thought, what the hell is wrong with me? I wrote my dissertation on Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, who is one of the canonical rationalist philosophers, the inventor of the infinitesimal calculus, one of the inventors of what we now think of as computer science. So a real no-nonsense guy. And in a way, that's, my intellectual model. At the same time, I'm very attracted to movements and tendencies that are much, much less kind of rigorous. And so in a way, the book is kind of an honest attempt to excavate both of these lineages that I see as constituting my own understanding of the world and my place in it.
I like the title. One of my favorite lines, and I never have figured out who exactly said it, was a comment called The Wilderness of Mirrors, or Life is a Wilderness of Mirrors.
Oh yeah.
And I love just thinking about what that means. Like,
oh yeah.
that you're walking through a wilderness of mirrors, and you're seeing yourself everywhere. And
yeah.
And so I like the title of the book that you have there. So how do we bring this forward to you? You brought this forward and talked about in your book about Twitter and arguments that, I spend all my time arguing online, and there's social, we're arguing about our conscious bias or unconscious bias and topics and trying to resolve these issues. Like somehow your tweet is everyone's going to have an aha moment and go, oh crap, we're all racist. We should stop that. That guy tweeted something, and then no one does it. So what's the paradigm of how that applies?
Well, look, I honestly think that that the world would be better off if all of the internet, except maybe online banking and Wikipedia, were suppressed, right? I think Wikipedia is a wonderful kind of exceptional success story. I agree with the person who said it works in practice, but not in theory. An inversion of the old idea about Marxism. It is a beautiful realization of the dream of the great Enlightenment encyclopedists, and it should be retained. Social media, by contrast, is deeply, deeply harmful to civil society, and it is what I have taken to calling a perversion or a parody of the idea of the public sphere, right? We engage in it as if it were the site in which deliberative democracy and the free exchange of ideas occurs, even though it is structured in such a way as to ensure that that never actually happens, right? No, I'm serious. It's really.
I agree with you. I agree with you. I'm just laughing because you're so right.
It's structured by algorithms over which we have no control as users, and because these are private companies, it's taken for granted that we have no right to even ask what these algorithms are. But we all know as users that they exacerbate disagreement, disagreement, one, and two, radicalization, right? That is, we all know that if you say something subtle and carefully thought out and nuanced and hesitant, like any intelligent person should, it's going to fall flat, right?
Yeah, no one will read that. Yeah.
And so the radicalization and the exacerbation of disagreement mean effectively that we have to suppress this instinct that we have from being old enough to remember the pre-internet period, and from whatever rudimentary civics education we had inculcated into us the idea that that participation in debate, in deliberation about the issues that affect us in society is a good thing, right? We take it for granted that that's a good thing because we grew up in the latter part of the 20th century. But I sincerely believe, and I'm arguing this in my next book, that it's your civic duty to not participate in the parody of deliberation that is social media, right? That you, even if you're right, even if your claim is substantively true, you're making things worse by stating it, right? So that leaves us in a real bind. I for the moment, I sound like simply a nihilist, huis clos sort of thinker. I don't know what the way out of this is. I have some ideas that I'm going to propose in the book, but how they're actually going to be implemented is something that I think at this moment is objectively unforeseeable.
And I think you're right. I'm might be older than you or about the same age. I grew up without the internet. When we were 10, 11, we were throwing dirt clods at the side of the house and, I don't know, running around, building like tree houses and crap and adventuring through the woods and stuff behind our house. And so I watched, all this stuff come up. In fact, like I said, the beginnings of Twitter we were on, and there was this whole kumbaya of like the internet, it's the great democracy and the democratization of ideas and freedom of information. It used when I grew up, your parents had to spend $5 billion getting the Encyclopedia Britannica thing. Some guy would come knock on your door, and it's like, how much is that so my stupid kids can learn? And it's like, $4,000 a book or some crap, and like you say, now they can go on Wikipedia. And so there was this whole kumbaya moment, and even early on in Twitter's history and Facebook, people like me vaulted it and said, this can bring the world together. We can become one, and I saw a lot of that going on where people became, people started realizing the humanity of everything, where it wasn't so much territorial anymore and tribal or less tribal. But then it turned. We saw the failure of governments and stuff, and then governments went, "Hang on, wait, we can destroy each other with this. This is we can use this as a weapon." And a lot of people, I think, started turning that, what you would put in your book, the dark side. And now it's come full circle where the extraneism of ideas, I'm not sure if that's the right word, but like we're going just full batshit like on stuff. Like like it's and maybe is that the web? We kind of had fringe stuff before, but it couldn't catch fire. Like you had to like buy like some really weird niche magazine and I try to keep things in perspective. Like, I grew up in California in the 1970s. A friend of mine you might want to have on the show, Eric Davis, wrote a wonderful book called High Weirdness about let's say esoteric occult movements, drugs, and popular culture in the 1970s, particularly in California. It's a wonderful book. And without being conscious of this, I was steeped in that stuff. Just looking, like, when I was a kid, I went into a bookstore, a typical bookstore in Sacramento where I grew up. I went into the metaphysics section, and it was all about astral projection and stuff that academic philosophers consider beyond the scope of the project of metaphysics properly conceived, right? And so we were just steeped in that stuff, and it's important to remember that, like, that we've always been a bit bonkers, particularly in the United States, particularly in California, and the internet didn't generate that stuff de novo. But there are some telling figures, right? One figure that I like to point out is that hits on, or the metrics for flat Earth
YouTube videos spiked after Trump's election, right?
Yeah.
And I take that as pretty revealing. It's not that Trump himself is a flat earther. I don't think Trump himself was a birther either, referring to Barack Obama's birth certificate and that whole scandal circa 2011. But there was a sense that became very sharp towards the middle of the 2010s of the previous decade, that we had to get more we had to up the ante and get more extreme in various ways. And this was certainly felt in electoral politics, but it was also felt in what you might call popular natural philosophy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the stakes were too low, say, for creationism to have the appeal that it once had. People needed to go for something more kind of hard-edged, and I think that explains this kind of natural gravitation towards flat eartherism, right?
Or QAnon.
Or QAnon.
So is this the thing where just people need a new drug?
It's kind of like an epistemological crack epidemic of the mid 2010s. That's one way to see it, right?
I'm part of the epistle.
Where there was all of this stuff was always around, but it just got distilled into a more
potent. Yeah, most times, I mean, with these QAnon people, like if we would have found you like 20 years ago, running around spouting this QAnon stuff, we'd put you in a facility. Right.
So there's a general sense that we needed to up the ante, but also the kind of the decentralization of authority, right? Where you no longer have just a few media outlets telling you what the right version of, say, the Vietnam War, I'm thinking of Walter Cronkite, is. You now have just, as many possible sources of authority as you might want to find. So it's like choose your own authority is the spirit.
Crazy.
And that's the spirit of the current moment, and that's definitely something that is a direct consequence of the rise of new information technologies. As an intellectual historian, it's important not to draw cause and effect relationships too quickly. But here, I think it's really clear that the internet is making us crazy.
The internet is making us crazy. That should actually be the title of one of your books. I see what you're saying now. It makes sense because, and I'm not sure if you're just a fringe crazy person that I've latched on to because I needed a drug. But, let's look at it from 10,000 feet. But no, I can see that. Even like I mentioned Watergate, the Watergate girl with Jill Wine-Banks. One thing she talked about was back then, you had the three networks. And, you had a basis of truth, a basis of untruth. And now, I mean, just stuff is so blended. I mean, you talk to people and they have, and sometimes their craziness makes, there's some times where I've had to sit down and go, do I really know what's true? I mean, maybe I'm not true. I mean, I looked at Justice Kavanaugh, when Justice Kavanaugh went through his thing, and we, with the liberals like myself, we put him through a big thing because obviously it was very. I mean, Trump had said it that he had put forth this guy because he was a guy who might help get him off in a constitutional crisis. The other stuff was a bit of an add-on as to why he was maybe unfit because of what he did in college. But even then, it was just the offense of what he was trying to do.
Yeah.
And then recently he actually voted in favor of not giving the same thing that Nixon went through and not giving the thing.
Yeah.
And so it made me question. I'm like, geez, did we ruin that guy's whole life and career and drag him through the mud just because whatever? And then of course now an article has come out that he was working in the back of the scenes to try and get them to not rule on it and to avoid it, that an abortion issue. So now you're like, okay, well maybe he deserved it. But sometimes I look at stuff like that. I try and question, I try and get outside of my own box and go, am I smoking my own crack these days?
Yeah,
but
of course. That's a really good example. Yeah.
I don't think a lot of people take that introspection of what they believe. Sometimes I question what I believe. I learned that from business. It's a business aspect that I learned where you go back and I call it the crazy eye, and you go back and recheck your models. And you go, why did I build it this way? And then you improve it because you can question it and analyze it. And I've tried to do that with logic and reason through my life as much as I can. But then I always, 5 years later down the line, I'm like, I was an idiot.
Yeah, of course. Well, I mean, that's kind of like intro to philosophy, day one, the kind of message we try to get across is that there's a difference between wisdom and knowledge, right? And that the kind of cultivation of wisdom is all about constantly reminding yourself of your own epistemic limitations, right? That's what it is to be wise. And that's not to say you should never commit yourself to anything. And there's a deep problem that, if wise people are all like Socrates and they all insist that they know nothing, then the wiser people are going to be the least effective people, and the stupider people are going to be the ones who are out there transforming the world. And that is indeed what happens, and that's an enduring problem. But one of the things I try to argue in Irrationality is that we really need to see claims of the sort, the earth is flat, contextually. You don't need to assess their content. You don't need to go out and, start looking at satellite images and stuff like that. But you need to understand why they're being said in this particular moment. And there was this one NBA player, a young guy who was really into flat earth theory for a while. And I watched a few interviews with him, and I was sincerely touched when I listened to him, because it became very clear very quickly listening to him that all he really meant was, hey, look, I'm out here trying to think for myself, and I don't like having other people telling me what to think, and I'm just a young guy trying to figure the world out. And it was so touching and sincere. I came away from it thinking, yeah, why not let this guy flirt with flat eartherism for a while? He's probably going to come out of it more intelligent than the kind of bien pensant literalist who thinks that whatever the scientific establishment tells you is ipso facto true. Right?
Yeah. So I don't know how you can't really put this back in the Pandora's box. Now it's out. You can't just go, we're shutting down the internet, man.
Yeah.
Like my example earlier with Watergate, I mean, now there's so many of these different things. And one of the problems maybe with social media I've heard discussed is that it gave everyone a voice, which probably wasn't always a good idea. Maybe it was better that, there was a few companies that had to pay a lot of money to the FCC and to get licenses so they could broadcast BS. And there was kind of a standard of modicum of what truth was and what they should report and maintaining certain standards. Yeah. But, now you don't need an FCC license. I mean, I'm some idiot with a podcast. I don't have a radio license. I didn't have to go, I can swear on this, say that the George Carlin, 9 words. And I can spout whatever sort of crazy stuff I want. In fact, I think that's what the podcast is for. But the problem is it creates a million different genres of, or I don't know if genres is the right word, but a million different things of how crazy you can be.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, like, they tune into it, like you mentioned earlier, that, you know, certain these videos will take off.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the algorithms, like you say, on social media, especially Facebook, aren't built for logic. They're built for emotion,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so they're built to play on our emotion, not our logic. I used to complain about how, you know, I'd make these logical videos on YouTube, and I'd make logical posts. And the more logical the video was, the more logical the post, the more no one would see it. But if I get up and start sucking down Tide Pods and talking crazy stuff, well, there's 5 million views right there. And you know, and the same thing with Facebook, I get all the likes.
Yeah. I mean, it's all very complicated, because I have to say, like, everything I've seen of Zoomers on TikTok doing crazy things, I think is just so delightful and life affirming. Like, I can't get enough of it. I don't want to come across in my articulation of concerns as just an old grump, or as someone who wants to burn it all down. And I do hope that there would be a way to reform, a way to have more accountability. But I think that given that it's too late to just, you know, shut it all down, we do need to start rethinking again the value of expertise and authority, and coming up with new ways to have, like, a moderate, kind of sensible, expert oversight of, you know, what gets put out there in public and what gets, let's say, blocked in some way. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
And there's a certain aspect of it. You know, I've watched flat earth videos for the entertainment. Like, I'm a car crash person. I love watching car crashes. Like, one of my favorite things to do used to be to watch Cops and Cheaters. Whenever I get depressed and I'd be like, my life sucks, I go watch Cheaters. I have a vodka and go watch Cheaters, or I go watch Cops. And then at the end, like 2 hours later, I feel really good about myself, because I'm like, I'm not getting arrested and thrown in jail all the time. I'm doing pretty darn good. And I think if we, you know, like you, I have a TikTok addiction, especially at night. I'll lay down and be like, I'll watch a few TikToks and fall asleep, and 3 hours later, you know, 100 TikToks. But as long as we recognize that's entertainment, right?
Yeah.
Like if I go see a movie, it's entertainment. I don't. If I start thinking that The Godfather 2 is what everyone's doing in life, and I got to start walking around being Michael Corleone, they're going to put me in the fun house. Right. It's kind of become a fun house. But it is interesting to me. I'm going to try and pull up an article here. One of the things that's you know, we talked about the cults and the patterns that they do. And there was an article that I saw today that I tweeted, and I've tweeted so much crap, it's probably lost, but it talks about why religious people have been such fertile ground for people like Trump, and usually for autocrats. It's because they've already been taught to start believing some fantasy stuff of stuff that, you know, I mean, I think we can all agree that the Bible is kind of like loosely interpreted, and maybe has some I think most historians at least can say, you know, did Jesus really walk on water? I don't know about that, man. Maybe he had some good LSD, and so did the 12 apostles, and they're having a good old time in California. But, you know, I mean, you read the book and you just go, wow, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were in the Middle East. That's okay. But there's an article I just read today that talks about how if I can get you to start believing and suspending, you know, certain realities, you're fertile ground for everything else.
Yeah.
Like, I've had some friends that they listen to Alex Jones, and there's been a few different people that I've read that as journalists, they sat down and they started watching Fox News, and they're like, at first you're resistant to it, and like seems like entertainment. You're like, these people are stupid, ha ha. But after a certain amount of it, with the repetition, and soaking in, your brain starts going, but what if it's true? And then eventually you start down the path where you're like, oh yeah, it must be true.
Yeah, it's a difficult thing, isn't it? Because I honestly think it's an important exercise to do that. And, you know, I've been in the US for a while now, but when I was living outside of the US, every time I came back, if I was in a hotel room, the first thing I did was tune in Fox, right? And, and not MSNBC, Fox, right? Because I think it is objectively virtuous to try to get inside people's heads. But it's like that creates a tension, right? Because it's virtuous to do something that does involve some risk to yourself, right? Mm-hmm. Because indeed you can get sucked in. Now, I think at this point, I'm pretty safe, right? I can read books about astral projection, about satanic cults. I can watch Alex Jones. I can do anything I want, and I'm going to come out basically who I already am, right? I don't know what to make of that. I don't know that, you know, the old approach, like the approach of, say, the Vatican in the 17th century, was to, you know, keep all the crazy stuff for themselves while making sure all of these books were kept out of the hands of the common people who couldn't handle it. And, you know, I have appointed myself one of those select few who's in a position to kind of engage with whatever dangerous stuff is out there. I realize that's a problem, but I don't know how to resolve it.
You know, the thing is, you and I are old enough where we lived before this age, so we hopefully developed some, I don't know what you would call it, some formation of reason to a certain degree, and so we can see the Emperor's clothes for what it is. But if you're raised in this age as a young child, you know, I mean, I remember in 2010 seeing, you know, these 1 and 2 year olds playing iPads, and they grow up in this world, and it would be really harder for me to find a reason of anchor. You
know, one thing that just astounds me, like I can remember being a kid and finding for some strange reason, a book in German in Sacramento. And it was a book like something like a statistical yearbook of the West German Forestry Department or something like that.
That's
just
hot.
totally banal in terms of its actual content. But I was so excited to find this book in German that I worshipped it like a kind of fetish object. And eventually I would go on to learn German and write a dissertation on a German philosopher, and so on and so on. And so that, like, the scarcity of information in the world of my childhood was, in some respects, a very good thing. And I don't understand how this immediate access to whatever information you want is not propelling younger people who've grown up with the internet, to read so much great stuff. They still stay within their own little kind of world of comfort. But that's just me sounding old and griping, and
no, I think you have a good point. I mean, especially as Americans, we're freaking lazy, so we're just like, I'm gonna believe 5 things and then get a burger because I don't know, I don't want to break my brain, you know, and you know, we have to seek out. Like I can watch flat Earth videos, not for very long, because then my brain will start to hurt, and I'll find that I want to, you know, I start thinking dark thoughts of how do I choke this person to death? But you know, you can watch them for entertainment value, and you kind of get that car crash effect. But then after a while, you know, for me, I can only do it for so long. It's kind of like country music. Like there's only so long I can listen to.
I can remember one recent trip to the United States. Well, no, it must have been like 5 years ago. So it was before Garrison Keillor got canceled. I was listening to one of his monologues, and I never really liked him that much. I always thought he was boring. But he was talking about being a child on the prairie and listening to the radio, and how important for his kind of discovery of his own interests and his own sensibility these wacko radio preachers were, right? Like he loved the radio evangelists. He loved to listen to them whooping and hollering, and, it kind of made him who he was. And like you so rarely hear people acknowledging that today, right? And now Keeler has been blacklisted. We're not going to hear from him anymore. And more and more rarely do we hear people saying, like, there's this thing that I don't believe wholeheartedly, like I'm not a part of that world, but man, I'm glad it's around because it helped to shape me, right? And like these days, you either have to affirm something wholeheartedly as true, as fully true in a dogmatic way, or you have to reject it. And again, I think that's one of the symptoms of our corrosion, of our social corrosion by the forces of social media.
And it just occurred to me from what you were saying is we've now reached a point where they're starting to take stuff back, where they're starting to go, there's certain amount of crazies that we gotta start creating some scarcity of, because it's dangerous.
Yeah.
And so now we're seeing the reverse happen, where social media companies are saying, okay, we can't trust these idiots with anything. I've often said that needs to happen because, you and I grew up through the age where we didn't have to have signs on bridges that said, don't jump off the bridge, you might die. And then we went through that ironic age where suddenly we had to put signs on everything, don't put the plastic bag over your baby's head or they might die. Don't drink the bleach, except for president. Right. Don't drink the bleach because it's probably, and everything had to have a disclosure warning for stuff that was completely obvious to anyone with half a brain. Yeah. But now we're having to dial that back. Like one video I just watched today off of CNN, this teacher, she wrote an op-ed where she said that she had voted for Trump and she may have signed a death warrant because she's now having to go back to school, and she's acknowledging that she may have been complicit in. And it's hard to draw a direct line to that, but also I think we all contribute to the death of hundreds of thousands of other Americans. And it was obvious to me what Trump was. I've studied all my life, but to her, she's like, I should have put more thought into it. I should have, and I'm not calling her a bad person. I'm just saying this is what she said. And she said, I should have put more thought into it. I should have cared more about what was important. And what's interesting, early in the show, you talked about how, this can cause a loss of life, a destruction of selves. The problem is in cases like what's going on with COVID-19, we're all in the same damn boat, right? Yeah. So if you want to go crazy and upset the boat or start ramming holes in the bottom of the boat because, I don't know, you think that's the great thing to do, then we all gotta either live and die with you.
Yeah. I mean, it's so strange, like my opinion of Trump has not budged a millimeter since 1987, right? The first time I saw him on Entertainment Tonight or whatever as a teenager, I was like, I know who this guy is. And so I have a lot of difficulty listening to people who wake up at this or that moment, right? And say oh, wow, so that's one point. Another point is, my friend Thomas Chatterton Williams was spearheaded this letter on cancel culture and so on recently in Harper's Magazine that caused a lot of discussion in all the op-ed pages around the country. And, I've been thinking about this a lot, and I do think that that the problem is more difficult than that letter led on, because there is a real problem of disinformation that is greatly exacerbated by new technologies, that is something distinct from the problem of limitations on freedom of speech, right? If you ban, not just say a social media company banning by its own policy accounts that pretend to be something they're not, but actually outright legal prohibition of that kind of disinformation. I recognize that that bumps up against the First Amendment in uncomfortable ways, but I don't see how we can possibly respond to the monumental task of combating disinformation of the sort that has put forth QAnon and other movements without acknowledging that it's not going to be enough to just say, I'm a First Amendment fundamentalist and everything goes, right?
Yeah.
So in that respect, I mean, I like to say that, the First Amendment is a lot like the Second Amendment in that, the Second Amendment was written with muskets and other 18th century firearms in mind. Similarly, the First Amendment was composed with broadsides and other slow circulating information of the 18th century in mind. And I don't know how to make it work for all of the challenges of the 21st century.
See, probably I know when I grew up, there were mental institutions all over, and I guess Reagan got rid of those or something.
Yeah.
And so if you started spouting crazy stuff, they took you down to the mental institution. Your family was like, "Hey, Bob, you gotta go to the funny farm. They're gonna give you some medicine, one flew over the cuckoo's nest type thing.
Yeah.
And they're gonna make things better. And if not, we'll just cut a slice up here and we'll fix that for you." Now, like you say, with the First Amendment and what people think are their First Amendment rights, it's come to a point where it's like there seems to be no end to the batshittiness you can go on. And sadly, with the the videos we're seeing of people wearing masks, the entitlement and selfishness of being like, I can think whatever I want and it doesn't matter who I endanger. Like I said, if you endangered people and started acting weird and talking weird stuff, they just put you in the funny farm home and gave you some drugs. That, or they just let you start your own religion or cult. Right. Which, either one. I always make the joke that what's interesting about religion is if I start telling you that I'm seeing people and I'm talking to people and they're talking to me, you'll put me in a funny home for what's that called?
Yeah.
But if I tell you that it's God talking to me, that's fine. Okay, go run with that, my brother. But so I don't know, but there comes a point where you're dangerous. We saw that with the Pizzagate thing with the QAnon, where people decide one day to take up guns, and fortunately no one was killed in that event. But he went in there with the intent of killing somebody or shooting up, and pedophilia and all this sort of stuff. I've seen this on Twitter too. People really believe this stuff. You see the things they've said about Bill Gates and all this thing, and maybe it comes down to we're stupid too. Like one of my favorite quotes of George Carlin to try and explain all this or reason with it is his quote that says, "Think of how stupid the average person is, and realize that half of them are stupider than that." Which puts a good paradigm on it when you really think about it. I mean, that is the law of average, right?
Yeah. But look, 100 years from now, QAnon could be seen as like this old, boring, staid tradition or institution, and the kids will be rebelling against that by saying more extreme things,
So we're just gonna go like. So basically, what you're saying is there's gonna be stuff that's even worse than that. People are like, that QAnon stuff, like.
No, it's more like that. If it becomes mainstream, it will just get normal, right? You see this, a great example of this is the Quakers, right? The history of the Quakers in the 17th century. They were flailing around on the ground, right, in like this ecstatic religious fits, right? That's why they called them Quakers. Now, in the American religious landscape, no one is more kind of sober and staid than a Quaker. You bump into a Quaker, you know this is someone you can talk to, right? So
or get oats from.
So this is something that happens over and over again in social movements. They start out in an ecstatic frenzy, and if they catch on, then they cool down.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens.
And we mentioned this earlier, and I meant to bring it up when you were talking, but we talked about how everybody, the democratization of ideas and people with mouthpieces went from a very a scarcity concept to everyone has one, and now I lost the train of thought that I was trying to get back to, but basically it gave everyone a voice, and maybe everyone doesn't need a voice.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't want to say there are people who should be deprived of their voices, but we're mistaken to encourage everyone to think that they have something to say simply in virtue of the fact that they exist.
I think there's a book author, an author of a book called Death of Expertise that I'm trying to get on.
Yeah. I know the book it's Tom Nichols, right?
Yeah.
Tom Nichols. Yeah.
I'm trying to get him on, or at least get a hold of that book.
Yeah.
I think that was part of it, where we, there was this rise, and I don't know if it's, over 40 years I've watched the collapse of the middle class. Starting the Reagan era, the trickle down economics and all that crap, and the middle class has collapsed. And I think with that collapse and the desperation and the trying to find reason or economic stuff, the death of manhood, or at least let's put it this way, the manhood the way we thought it was, the death of we've all had to rethink manhood now, and a lot of people are lost. Like, you look at the incel kids.
Sure.
These are young boys who, in today's world, they can't figure out where it is between Me Too and everything else. And there's nothing wrong with that, but they're trying to balance who they are with their caveman brains and the societal standards that are changing. And, men went through that, where men were like, I'm the household earner and she stays home. And, I watched that whole era go through. I watched the era of people who were like, you go to a job, you work at that one job at that one company 40 years, they give you a gold watch and you're out of there. And more and more, when you look at everything that's gone on, everything in the aspects of all our lives, maybe I'm answering my own thing here, is become more disposable. Our marriages are more disposable. Our relationships are more disposable. Our jobs are more disposable. Our income is more disposable. Maybe it's the failure of all of that, or the loss of the security of that, starting to drive us insane. It's like, it's the old thing where the military blasts Metallica at the Waco, Texas thing or something. And, and it drives the bees mad. No. I mean, new types of person are being generated, like the incel, right? Yeah.
Though, I mean, there are precedents for that, like in 19th century literature. The figure of the superfluous man. That's the incel, right? We've had that before, but it's making a comeback in the 21st century, indeed, for the reasons you mentioned that have to do with mostly with economics and the precaritization of basically everything, right?
It's so weird, because this conversation we're having and what you wrote in your book, from the Greeks era, he's just, everything is just recycled, man. We're just like the flat earth stuff. You're like, I thought we had that resolved in, I don't know, the 3rd century or whatever it was,
Right.
And,
Right.
we see the rise and fall of empires. There's questions about whether or not our little democracy is going to rise and fall because we got a little too heady about ourselves, just like the Roman Empire did, just like the British Empire did, and everybody who thinks they're infallible or immortal finds out they're not the hard way, and it usually comes to that juxtaposition.
Oh yeah. No, the same problems just keep coming back. I'm a perennialist about that. I mean, look, given that we have exactly the same brains, exactly the same biological makeup that the ancient Greeks had, there's no basic reason why we should be confronting different problems than they did.
Did you ever see the movie Idiocracy?
Oh yeah. That was Mike Judge, wasn't it? The Beavis and Butthead guy. Yeah. That was brilliant. Yeah.
Because I tell a joke now that it's with the Trumpers, it's gone from a fiction to a documentary or a future documentary. The way we're going with Trumpers,
absolutely,
just people becoming dumber.
Yeah.
And I think the internet has made it easier to be dumber, right? Because you don't really have to learn everything. You can Google it. Like, you don't have to learn history. Yeah, if you got a question, you can just Google it.
Well, it depends. I know, because I'm not boasting. I'm just describing something that I've observed. Like, I feel like it's making me smarter, right? Like, because, there are so many things. Like, 20 years ago, I'd be driving along and I might think, like, what is a quasar anyway, right? Mm-hmm. And then I just think, oh, never mind. It's too hard to figure it out, right? Like, I could, but today, like, when I have the thought, what is a quasar anyway? 5 seconds later, I'm on Wikipedia finding out some pretty basic and clear information about quasars, right? Mm. And so having been in that mode for about a decade now, I feel like it has changed the way I think, the way I learn, the way I process information. And for the most part, this has been for the better, right? Obviously, there are pros and cons to this, but for the most part, it's a good thing. But that's not the general rule, and I don't quite understand what the difference is.
50% of the people are
right.
Lower than average.
Right. Yeah.
And the epiphany I just had is it's the utilization of how it is. I mean, you and I approach it from an analyzation basis of learning, and we also judge it, but we don't just go, oh, well, Bob, dear leader on high, or Reverend Joe said so, so therefore it must be true.
Right.
Maybe that's what it is the application of the utilization.
Yeah. And in part, it's because
given Justin a fifth book title.
Yeah, right. No, I've got enough work cut out for me as it is.
Yeah, you do. But no, this is an interesting book. Anything more we need to know about your book and everything else? Because it sounds like you and I could spend hours doing this.
One thing worth mentioning is that a paperback edition has, I think, just been released, and they let me write a new preface for the paperback, and I finished the preface dated April 15th, 2020, at which time I was in Brooklyn under quarantine. Wow. And it was at the moment of the peak of the pandemic in New York. And I think I was so grateful to have the opportunity to write this preface because it allowed me to bring the book into the Corona era, which is an era for which the book was, I don't want to say prophetic, but it was bumping up against this era, and I think anticipating in curious ways things that would become crystal clear only after the original hardback edition was published. So I'm not insisting that people buy the paperback rather than the hardback, but I do want to emphasize that the preface deals with our present moment, or in any case, our present moment extending back to mid-April of this year.
No kidding. I mean, I can imagine what you would have written over this thing that we do with the mask thing, whereas people are like, I'm not wearing a mask.
Yeah.
And you're like, yeah.
Well, what really struck me were news reports from around the world. We were hearing the same reports from Israel, from Russia, from evangelical preachers in the American South. That is, they vacillate between two possible approaches. Like, we have the grace of God. We're going to be fine, crowded into this church with no masks. But then and then another extreme, which is what this preacher in Louisiana, whose name I'm forgetting now, one of these mega churches, I loved the way he said it. For us believers, for us Christians, death has a different meaning than for y'all, right? And I thought that was so important. Like he was saying, like, look, yes, we acknowledge the virus exists, but we're romantic about this. It's like kamikaze pilots reciting romantic poetry as they're crashing their planes into Allied ships. There are numerous examples of this in history, of people who believe in something so fully that the rational calculus of will this course of action hasten my death or not, become something completely different. So I got to discuss all of that in the preface in ways that I was grateful for.
And you see a lot of that. The challenge with that is there are people that decide it's okay to take everyone with you, like Jonestown. Yeah. Like Jonestown was like, okay, we're all going to die and do the thing because God is what good and all that BS. But then they go, but you have to come with us.
Yeah, right.
And then that's when it gets scary. I recently saw some guy who killed. This probably is. Who knows the story because it goes on every week. Guy wipes out his whole family, or a mother who kills her own children, which is really extraordinary when you think about it. That what the mind has to go to cross that thing, especially with a mother. I mean, a mother has a different relationship, I think, with her children than a man does, and I've seen this form of suicidal nature in religious people. I have relatives who will make the statement, well, I just wish God would take me. And you're well, I really like having you around, and I really hate that you have this suicidal tendency about you that you almost want to prophesize or encourage your own death. And you think, and the madness of it with me being an atheist is, what if you're wrong? It's the old Groucho Marx show where you had to guess the word in Groucho Marx's head. And if you didn't get the right word, you were wrong. You can live your whole life betting that Catholicism is the what God wants you to be, and you'll get into heaven if you're Catholic. But then, and I think South Park did a beautiful thing on this, but I was thinking it long before South Park. But, there's the magic word. There's 3,000 gods that humans have created over all their lives from going back to cavemen. And somehow you have to guess the right answer that no one knows Groucho Marx has in his head as God. And if you're wrong, well, you're going to go to hell and you're going to burn, you're going to die, and you're going to suffer. But remember, God loves you, as George Carlin would say. Lots of George Carlin today. But it's that whole suicidal element of it that makes me mental, and then the dismissal of it. And then wanting to take people with you, because we're seeing people that are not wearing masks, and and the thing about COVID-19 is, if you decide you want to go, hey, screw it, I'm not going to wear a mask, and if I get it, I die, fuck it. The problem is you should take a bunch of us with you through either infection or whatever the case is. It's not an island unto yourself. And so we're stuck in that bro boat with you. I think there's a parable or a paradigm or a story of deciding whether to throw people out of the lifeboat or not. I can't place it so someone can look at it. So thanks for coming on the show, Justin. What a lot hopefully of fun, we had a really good discussion about your book and some of the different principles, and I don't think we solved anything because maybe it's unsolvable.
But, no, the book itself just ends with a bunch of question marks. as any true philosophy book does.
But it's probably better in that way because, like we've talked about here,
Yeah.
you know, as long as we ascertain and question and theorize and think about stuff instead of just accepting truth in a blind sense, then hopefully that's better. Because I mean, if I was in QAnon, like I'd be sitting there the whole time going, "What the hell now? What the hell now?" I mean, that's what happened to me when I grew up in a cult. I was constantly like, "You guys are what? And there's what? There's some space aliens and planets and shit." Okay, you guys, at 3 years old, I knew it was crack. I knew it was all crack. And somehow I learned enough about human nature at 3 to 4 years old where I was like, somebody's making money off this, huh? Yeah, I can see what's going on right now.
Right.
Anyway.
Yeah, it's eternal, isn't it? Yeah.
Guys, check out his book. It's with Princeton University Press, Justin Smith, A History of the Dark Side of Reason, Irrationality. And I think this is really interesting. I'm going to look forward to getting a copy from Princeton so I can read it. And of course, you guys can probably get it on Amazon or individual booksellers, or yourself the book. And I think it's an important thing for our age because we've got to try and get back to truth. We've got to try and get back to figuring out. And I think it's interesting that now Facebook and social media things are trying to create some scarcity and are realizing that you can't trust people. You know, you've got to put up signs that say, "Don't jump off the bridge." And sadly, people still jump off the bridge because they're like, "I didn't know it was a bad thing."
Yeah.
Now we're all dead. So thanks to my audience for tuning in. We certainly appreciate you guys being on the show. Go to thecvpn.com. Refer it to your family, neighbors, relatives, all dogs, cats, all that stuff. Get them to listen to the show because then they'll be smarter because they can listen to philosophers like Justin Smith here and his brilliant works. Also, if you get a chance, put a nice 5-star referral on the show. We certainly appreciate that when you do that on iTunes. And you can see the video version of this on youtube.com/Chris Voss. Hit that bell notification button. Thanks for tuning in. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time.
It's been a pleasure.